This is WAAY 31 Law Call.
Hey, good evening and welcome to WAAY 31 Law Call. I'm Robert Lane in for Sharon Doviet. We're going to be talking tonight about workers' compensation. So if you're hurt on the job, what do you do? Get your phone calls into us. It's 256-536-0077. And we're going to find out, can they really fire you if you file a complaint? With me from the law firm of Timberlake and League is William Messervy and my absolute favorite, Eagle Scout.
Oh,
how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me, Robert.
So, workers' comp is your specialty.
It is. It's we handle any type of personal injury case, but I'd say workers' comp's probably 40% of what I do all day long.
Excellent.
Monday through Friday, sometimes on the weekend, and sometimes at night.
Well, I bet that's the truth. Okay, give us a phone call, 256-536-0077. But while you're getting your phone calls in, we're going to take a You Make the Law call from YouTube video.
All right.
So take a look at this video because it happened on the job. It's a big furnace thing,
Okay.
and I guess this is a security camera.
Okay.
And so if you watch the security camera, look at the guy in the, look at the guy running.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to ask you is, if that was your client, what would you do? And you at home, if you were on the jury, what would you award this guy?
Yeah. So I mean, the question, whether it be a personal injury case or a workers' compensation case, is what is the severity of the injury suffered? And that, of course, is not going to be really revealed in the video. But if you're injured on the job, and we're going to presume that the man operating the forklift was indeed on the job at the time that this occurred, he's going to be entitled to some basic benefits. You know, his medical bills are going to be paid for by workers' comp. They're going to owe him 2/3 his average weekly wage for the time he's off work. And then lastly, they're going to owe him something for his permanent injury. But if he violated a safety rule, he's not going to be entitled to anything other than his medical treatment paid for. So there are some exceptions to workers' comp. If you're engaged in horseplay, if you're engaged in a fight or an argument, if you're violating a safety rule, they can deny the compensability of the injury. And so at that point, the only thing they owe you for is medical treatment. One of the things that we see sometimes where it's alleged that there was a safety rule violation is with seatbelts.
Explain that to me.
Yeah, so if someone doesn't have their seatbelt on in the vehicle and they're injured while on the job, you know, their employer may say, hey, look, that is not going to be compensable because you didn't comply with the safety rules. You didn't have your seatbelt on. So now there's some case law that goes against that, but that tends to be where we see that the most. The other time you see it is on factory lines. You know, they'll say, well, you're not supposed to have your hands anywhere near there. Now, that's not always the practice, right? And so, but it may be buried in a employee handbook somewhere.
But would a case like that ever get to a jury?
It would never get to a jury because in workers' comp, you're only entitled to a bench trial. And a bench trial simply means a trial by judge. And so the judge is going to be, in that situation, both the arbiter of law and of fact. Typically, the judge is always going to be the arbiter of law, but the jury is going to be the arbiter of fact. And so in that situation, you're just going to get a judge. He's going to determine all of it.
Well, get your phone calls in, 256-536-0077. And Betty is standing by. Betty, what's on your mind tonight?
Okay, I'm got injured on the job, and because there's only 4 people that he doesn't have the workman's comp, but he has liability insurance. Is he not supposed to pay my hospital bills? I fell and broke my hip.
Yeah, so if you are an employer in the state of Alabama and you have less than 5 employees, you're not required to carry workers' compensation coverage. Now, does that mean that that employer doesn't have any liability? Not necessarily. You can bring an action through what's called the Employer Liability Act, but they're difficult, and they're not going to be required to pay for your medical treatment as you receive it. They're not going to be required to pay you 2/3 your average weekly wage during the time the doctor has you out of work. So it's not exactly the same as going through a workers' comp case, because you're not going to get any of the benefits along the way. And so when we talk about workers' comp and what it is, it's different from being injured in any other way, okay? In a car accident or any other type of injury, we follow what's called common law, which is just what have judges done in the past. But when we're discussing workers' compensation, it's a statutory scheme. It's codified law in Montgomery. And so what happened during the Industrial Revolution is you had these people coming off of farms to work in factories. There was no OSHA, there were no safety rules. And so you had these people getting hurt, maimed, and killed. And if they could prove the company was at fault, they'd get these big settlements, their families would be okay. But the vast majority of people couldn't prove that their injury was the fault of their employer. And the common law cause of action at the time was failure to provide a safe work environment. And so labor and management came together and developed a workers' compensation system. And Alabama's is based off Minnesota's, of all places. But essentially...
Is there a reason for that?
If there is, I don't know it. Other than I guess they liked it. So, you know, but... and they were one of the first states to implement workers' compensation. But, you know, what the compromise is, labor and management came together and they negotiated this compromise. The compromise is there'd be no big, huge settlements anymore because pain and suffering and mental anguish went away. If you're in a car wreck or premises liability case, you can get pain and suffering and mental anguish, but you can't get that in workers' comp. And so, you know, the exchange for giving that away is that you no longer have to prove the employer's at fault. If you are injured on the job, whether it's your employer's fault or just something that happened, then you're going to be entitled to certain basic benefits, but by and large, those big settlements went away.
Okay, but I know you've had cases where they've taken off safety equipment and, you know, things of that nature. How are those types of cases resolved?
Yeah, so, you know, they can be what we call disputed claims, okay? And if you have a disputed claim, you know you're going to need a lawyer. Because workers' comp saying, hey, we don't think you're entitled to benefits and here's why. You think that you are. And our job as the lawyer is to go in and look at the law and then look at the case law, how have the judges interpreted that law, and to establish a path forward to get that injury compensable.
And so for someone like Betty, if they don't have workers' comp because they have too few employees, then does all the rest of the law come into effect?
It can, but it's going to be ruled by that Employers' Liability Act, and it similarly sets forth what you're entitled to or what you can recover. But in some ways, there's more flexibility than in workers' comp. But the real problem with that is that most employers don't know about it. They don't know if they're insured for it. They don't know how to make that claim if their employee is hurt. And so, you know, by and large, if you're injured on the job and there are less than 5 employees, you're going to need a lawyer to represent you. And you're going to need an injury that is significant enough to try to pursue it through the courts. In other words, you know, a small cut on the arm, you're probably going to spend more on that than you'd ever get back out of it. But you'd still want to discuss it with a lawyer.
Give us a call here, 256-536-0077. Anything about getting hurt on the job, but mostly about workers' compensation. Now, I can't fire somebody if they file a workers' comp complaint,
so,
right?
Alabama is an at-will employment state. And what that means is you can be fired for good reason, bad reason, or no reason at all. And that's perfectly acceptable in the state of Alabama. They can't fire you for one of your constitutionally protected reasons. Alabama adds maybe a couple to that list, but the main one is that under Alabama's workers' compensation laws, you can't be fired for having filed or maintained a workers' compensation action. And so we call that retaliatory discharge. Now the problem is most employers aren't going to say, hey, Robert, you were injured the other day and you filed a workers' comp claim, I'm going to let you go. They're going to say, hey, Robert, I'm so sorry, but you were 2 minutes late coming back from lunch and we just got to let you go, right? So you, the ominous is on you to prove that you were terminated for having filed a workers' compensation.
Yeah,
so it doesn't always have teeth,
thing to do.
but you know, sometimes they put it in writing, which is a silly thing to do.
Okay,
know.
God bless stupidity.
Yeah.
All right, I'm all for
Yeah.
that. Let's get to go over to Hartselle, and Becky's been nice enough to hold. We appreciate it. Becky, what's on your mind?
Well, I have been injured for 22 years. I got injured at work, and I'm constantly battling workers' comp to approve my procedures. And I wanted to know what my step would be to get them to approve these things without having to suffer for so long.
Yeah, and that's a problem. So with workers' comp, you're entitled to medical treatment for life as it relates to that particular injury.
But just that injury.
Just that injury.
Okay.
But the vast majority of people, of course, aren't going to need that because their arm heals or their leg heals. But particularly with neck and back injuries, a lot of those people, if the injury is severe enough, they're going to require treatment for the rest of their life, right? Sometimes with hips, joints, you know, they're going to need additional treatment. And so workers' comp, treating through the workers' comp system is different than treating through your health insurance. You don't get to choose the doctor, you don't get to choose the treatments. They have to be all approved through workers' compensation. They use a process called utilization review, and it's an extremely frustrating process. Essentially what they do, the last one of these I really dug into, the doctor was 92 years old. He was on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. He hadn't treated a patient that I'm aware of in almost a decade. Certainly hadn't done surgery in that time. And they were using him to either say, hey, this treatment is necessary or not necessary for a patient he's never seen in a state that we don't even know if he's been to. And this is the utilization review process. That's the tier one. And so if he says, no, that's not medically necessary, and here's why I think that, then the workers' compensation approved authorized treating physician can then appeal that. And then they have to get a treating physician, similarly situated to your doctor, and they have a conversation on the phone. And that's usually where your doctor is able to tell the other orthopedic surgeon, hey, here, this is why this is necessary, and they'll typically agree, but not always. And so it can be a difficult process to go through. The short answer to her question is there's no bypass. There's no magic button you can hit and not be in utilization review. You can be guaranteed certain things will go into utilization review, almost any opioid, nerve blocks, anything that hasn't had a decade-long track record of being showing that it helps people. So it can be difficult for those reasons. Now, there is a way to regain control over your medical treatment. You can close your future medical benefits with workers' comp. You're particularly able to do this if you're on Medicare, but there are about 100 traps along the way. And so you need a lawyer to do it, usually. But there's a tool, and you can get Medicare's pre-approval to set up a Medicare set-aside trust. They'll have to be funded by workers' comp. And generally, they'll pay you some money on top of that for your non-Medicare covered items. And then if you do that and go that route and decide with your lawyer, hey, that's what I think would be best for me, then you can regain control of your medical treatment, and you can treat outside of workers' comp again. And you can pick your doctor and where you want to treat and what treatments you want. So there is a way around it, but it doesn't work for everyone. You know, it sort of just works
a complicated system
under these little circumstances. Yeah.
Well, listen, we're going to take a break here. Get your phone calls in, 256-536-0077. And when we come back, we'll tell you how you can get a race t-shirt without running the race.
That's true.
Back in a minute.
You're watching WAAY 31 Law Call, where lawyers come to help. Your rights, your calls, live. Hosted by family law attorney Sharon Doviet. With the personal injury attorneys of one of the Valley's most respected law firms, Timberlake and League. Featuring the knowledge of managing partner Michael Timberlake, with millions of dollars awarded to his clients. And the experience of attorney Will League, a strong courtroom fighter known for his commitment to winning. And the fellow partners of Timberlake and League Heath Brooks and William Meservey. This is WAAY 31 Law Call.
We're here with William Meservey of Timberlake and League. We're talking about workers' comp, but before we get back to the phones, the race Tell me about the race here.
Justice. So Madison County Volunteer Lawyers Program, which is a great program. We all know you've got a constitutional right to have an attorney provided to you in a criminal setting, but there's no constitutional right for that in a civil setting. So if you're below the poverty line and you need any sort of civil representation, whether that be a guardianship or a will, these folks can help. So this is the inaugural Race for Justice. It benefits the Madison County Volunteer Lawyers Program. It's on Labor Day, which is Monday, September 4th. There's a 5K, 10K, as well as a 1 mile fun run for children. It's at John Hunt Cross Country Park in Huntsville, which is the old airport.
Right.
And if you don't want to run, but you want to participate, there's a
I don't look
sleep-in
like
option.
a runner, do I? Okay.
I'm training for the 1 mile fun run with my boys. But there's a sleep-in option where you can still get a race shirt and you give a little contribution that goes to a great cause. So the registration date to get your t-shirt is August the 14th. You can scan the QR code on your TV, and it'll take you right to the landing page for the Race for Justice. And of course, we appreciate anyone who's willing to support the Madison County Volunteer Lawyers Program and the work that they do.
And let me add here, since you're just talking, Timberlake and League provides the wheelchair brigade for Broadway Theater League.
We do.
And this week starts Ain't Too Proud. So if you're going to go, and especially if you got older people or someone who's injured, you need a wheelchair, just call Broadway Theater League, and the good folk at Timberlake and League have provided wheelchairs for everybody, and they'll come pick you up at the curb.
They'll take
So
you right
great.
to your seat.
All right, we're talking about workers' comp tonight, and so let's get to the phones. Let's go to Moulton and Paul. Paul,
Yes.
you're up. What's on your mind?
I went to Moulton for rehab. I had back surgery, so they sent me to rehab in Moulton. And while I was in Moulton, I slipped and fell in the shower on my left knee on the 1st and 18th. And I've been having trouble out ever since then. They did everything possible they can do was trying to find. So first they said they couldn't find anything wrong with it. So they did MRI, X-rays, everything. So now he's still giving me trouble. So my orthopedic surgeon said now he's going to go in and do arthroscopic surgery on there to find out what's going on. It might be something born inside the knee. But I want to know if I have some kind of claim because I did fall in the shower while I was in rehab.
Potentially you do. You know, when you fall in the shower at rehab, that's going to boil down to if you're talking about a third-party case against the medical provider, you know, what were the orders? Were you allowed to be in the shower by yourself, or had the doctor said, look, this patient needs to be transferred to a seat in the shower? It gets very specific. So, you know, the only way to really give an answer to that question would be to review your medical records. But I will say this, but for his workers' comp, but for, you know, if he's in there for a workers' compensation injury,
right,
and then he has this fall, well, but for the workers' compensation injury, he never would have been in the hospital to begin with, never would have fallen. So, you know, there's an argument to be made there that all of what's going on in his knee, that treatment, could be tied back to his original workers' compensation.
That's why you're such a good lawyer. You're
Yeah.
thinking of these things.
Yeah, so, you know, we had a similar case once upon a time where, again, involved an injured, this was actually in a car accident, but, you know, the patient is in a medical facility receiving some treatment. They actually dislocate his shoulder, which wasn't part of his injuries from the accident. But for the accident, he wouldn't have been in there getting physical therapy or chiropractic treatment. I can't remember exactly which it was. And so, you know, the proximate cause of his shoulder injury was still the car accident. And we were able to tie those injuries in as well.
Yeah, and I know you do a lot of nursing home cases and things like that too. But anyway, let's get to Teresa here in Huntsville. Hey, Teresa, how can we help?
How are y'all doing tonight?
How are you?
We're good.
Oh, I'm doing really rather good. It's a lot of rain around here, you know? You could lighten up on that. Then again, actually, I just moved back from Oklahoma.
Okay.
And you had a workers' comp
Okay.
question?
Yes, I do.
Well, let's
All
hear
right.
it here.
A very close friend of mine, the spouse, work in the oil field. Okay, what happened was the chain was put in improperly. They were trying to reach TD, total depth. Trying to reach the total depth. The chain was not, the head of it was not the right size. Anyway, it got stuck. Everyone was well within safety area. They were all out of the way. So what the company said was a safe area. Well, when the chain finally came loose, because it was improper, and it came loose, it came back, and it popped Keith right in the face.
Did that happen in
I'm very
Oklahoma?
blessed that he is alive. Okay, what it did was it fractured his jaw, busted 2 teeth, and busted his nose, and a concussion. He did not go to the hospital immediately, of course, because he was out on location, which is actually 2.5 hours from the nearest hospital. So he said since they were only 2 hours from their tower, which is the amount of time they worked there, it's called a tower, he said then he would go to the hospital. He could handle it. Okay, so the 2 hours is up. They did their TD that night. I showed up, took them to a hospital, and they saw him. But then the next day we went to the Indian Health Services because we're native. So we went to Indian Health Services where they could do everything instead of just the ER workup. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is important to remember is that workers' comp laws vary sometimes greatly from state to state. And so it matters, and in this instance, it doesn't matter where you're injured, Robert. It matters where you entered into your employment agreement. So venue, or in other words, where is it proper to file a lawsuit or bring a claim in a workers' comp setting isn't what we do in normal cases like automobile accidents or premises liability. In those type cases, venue's proper where the injury or accident occurred or where the defendant resides. But in workers' comp, it's where you entered into your employment agreement. And so I'm only licensed in Alabama.
Right.
And so I wouldn't be able to speak to Oklahoma's workers' comp laws. But typically under Alabama law, all of those type injuries are going to be compensable injuries under workers' comp.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I hope that helped at least a little bit. Hang in there. We'll be right back. If you didn't get your question answered tonight, William, Missouri can be reached at Timberlake and League here in Huntsville at 256-536-0770, or you can get them at law-injury.com.
So for family law questions, Sharon Dovey at 256-539-7337, SharonFamilyLaw.com. And
you can join the attorneys of Timberlake and League Monday on the Midday News. We hope you'll listen in tomorrow. And is it once you're an Eagle Scout, you're always an Eagle Scout?
I think that's how it works. They haven't revoked me yet.
Well, if I wanted a lawyer, I think an Eagle Scout would be a good one. And we hope you'll join us again next Sunday. Sharon Dovey will be back, and we'll answer your legal questions live.
Y'all have a good night.